Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of our NBA Insider video live stream notebook right here on the one and only Bleacher Report app. My name is Jake Fischer, your resident NBA Insider for all things Bleacher Report, and the NBA trade market definitely got a little hotter this week with news out of Atlanta that the Hawks and Trae Young's representatives are officially working in tandem to figure out a new home for the four-time All-Star point guard. This is something that we've kind of been anticipating, that people around the league have been prepared for ever since Trae and the Hawks did not come to extension conversations at all, really, this summer, let alone an agreement. There really, to my knowledge, never really was much back and forth between player side, agent side, and the team about trying to have any type of resolution. The goal this year, I think, for everyone involved was for Trae Young to come back to Atlanta, to be the orchestrator of Quinn Snyder's high-flying offense, with Jalen Johnson back healthy, with Kristaps Porzingis, a new stretch five feature that the Hawks have never really had in Trae Young's tenure running this franchise. And then big free agent acquisitions like Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard, adding more shooting and some supplementary playmaking additionally in the backcourt, and have this whole thing turn into a top four seed in the Eastern Conference. And then best case scenario, I think both Trae Young and the Hawks would have been happy with him finding a new extension agreement and figuring out a new long-term arrangement to keep him in Atlanta. But that didn't happen. Trae was injured for some time, and when he returned to the floor, Atlanta lost 7 straight games with him back in the lineup after all this positive momentum that they had earlier in the year, with Jalen Johnson turning into a legitimate all-star candidate and this group really looking like a team that is going to be built around Jalen Johnson for the foreseeable future. So there's been a tangible change to my understanding of all this, in that now both sides, in Trae's side and the Hawks, are both saying that, yes, we are working on an inevitable end here, as opposed to let's wait and see. Because, at a certain point in time, Porzingis came back and played in Toronto last night, but not too long ago, people in Atlanta were saying how they had not yet had a chance to see Trae Young with a healthy Kristaps Porzingis, and it was too early to make any real assessment on what this situation looked like. But I don't know, candidly, what the real switch point and the inflection point is in all this, but we clearly have reached it. We clearly are at the beginning of the end with Trae Young and his time with Atlanta. So my partner at the Stein line, the Hall of Famer himself, Mark Stein, was the first to report yesterday that the Washington Wizards have emerged as a legitimate landing spot for Trae Young. And at this point in time, that's the only spot that I have on my radar as a legitimate possibility at this juncture. I still got more calls to make tonight after we hang up here on our live stream. I'll be calling on this all week and for the foreseeable future until there is a Trae Young trade consummated. But the Wizards are looking at a potential deal construct where CJ McCollum would go back to Atlanta. And the fact that the Hawks have some type of wiggle room tax-wise, they would only need to really add $6 million more to bridge the gap between CJ McCollum's $30 million salary and Trae Young's $46 million salary. So Trae for CJ is not exactly a straight up agreement that would get done if a Wizards Hawks deal does end up being the final solution here. But I think that is the absolute clear cut building block of what a deal could look like. And we're going to wait and see if Atlanta can find anything better. It does make some sense on the Wizards side of things, because Washington is going to have $80 million in cap space next summer. And that's been a question that cap strategists around the league have wondered out loud. all year long. Like, what are the Wizards going to do with $80 million? So if there is a way to have Trae Young tear up his $49 million player option for next year and then come to an agreement on a multi-year deal at a lower average annual value, I do see that as something that makes sense for the Wizards. They don't necessarily have someone orchestrating their offense with their young wings, with their young guards, and he could be that table setter that he has always been in Atlanta, one of the best assist men in the league. So we'll see. But for now, that's the only situation that I've really got my eyes on definitively that I feel comfortable enough that I have confirmed to share publicly. And we're just going to have to wait and see what Trae Young's representation at CAA and the Hawks' new front office under first-time general manager Ansi Sala can come together and figure out moving forward here. JD Heatlifer wants to know, are the Heat involved? That is not a team I have heard. DJ Jones 82 says, what's a good package that Minnesota can put together? And, we've talked about the Wolves a lot in the last couple of weeks on our show here. We've written about it at the Stein Line, which, again, if you're not subscribed to my joint writing effort with Mark Stein, the Hall of Famer, markstein.substack.com, please join us over there. We've been looking at the Wolves as a guard team for some time now, but I've said here, I've been skeptical of whether or not the Wolves are actually going to be willing to put together the outgoing salary that would match a Trae Young, that would match a John Morant, that could match LaMelo Ball in theory, because you're going to have to mortgage a legitimate rotation piece to do that. And I just don't know what Minnesota's appetite would be to do that. Too Cool Bean says, could Trae land anywhere else besides the Wizards? Like I said, right now, the Wizards are really the only team that we are tracking at this juncture as a confirmed, actively involved, talking to Atlanta team for Trae Young. That doesn't mean there aren't any others, but I have not confirmed any others at this juncture, and we're going to keep trying to do that all week long. Richard Taylor E2 says, if we're giving up Austin, that would be a travesty. I'm assuming that means Reeves and the Lakers. I don't think the Lakers are involved with Trae Young whatsoever. And I don't think the Lakers have any interest in trading Austin Reeves either. Tony B1905 says, who are the Bucks after? And the Bucks are after everyone. Like, anyone you could ask me in this chat right now, I can almost guarantee you that Milwaukee has thought about, could they go after him? Because that's the word on the street. If you talk to any rival team, talk to any opposing general manager, they will tell you that the Milwaukee Bucks are out there looking for whatever type of addition could come in and help keep Giannis Antetokounmpo happy in Milwaukee long term. So if you want to dream up any name from Zach LaVine to Anthony Davis to Trae Young, I'm sure Milwaukee has had some type of internal deliberation. But what the likelihood actually is, again, just like Minnesota, for the Bucks to put enough money on the table to go get a player making $40-50 million, they're going to have to part with both Miles Turner and Kyle Kuzma in all likelihood. And I don't know which player right now is really worth that price point for Milwaukee. Would Anthony Davis really be worth that price point? Because he is, outside of Giannis, and Giannis isn't really available right now, Davis is definitely the biggest name on the trade block and a bigger name than Trae Young. Trae Young is certainly being dangled and being discussed, and at this point right now seems more likely to be moved than Anthony Davis does, because the Hawks don't have nearly as high an asking price for Trae Young as Dallas does for Anthony Davis. And coincidentally, I think part of why Atlanta is expediting and increasing their conversations with other teams about Trae right now is because Atlanta, according to various league personnel with knowledge of the situation, Atlanta right now seems to be the team that is in most aggressive pursuit of Anthony Davis. So clearing up the uncertainty about Trae Young's player option and what he looks like on Atlanta's books moving forward, that would, give the Hawks a 3-week-ish runway to figure out what exactly is their appetite to meet Dallas's asking price for Anthony Davis. So that's going to be figuring out a combination of draft capital and what have you to compensate the Hawks or the Mavericks enough to make them think that getting rid of Anthony Davis is worth their while. And that's going to be a big question about Zachary Ricochet, number one. Like, so far, we've gotten major pushback from Atlanta that they are not interested right now to part with Zach Ricochet for Anthony Davis in particular. That doesn't mean Dallas isn't going to keep asking about him, but if Atlanta's two best hypothetical, sweetener incentive pieces that they could put out the door, that they could put on the table for anyone, whether it's Anthony Davis or whoever, are this 2026 Pelicans pick that could end up being the number one pick in the draft, or Zachary Ricochet. If you're Dallas, I don't think the Mavericks are going to so readily engage Atlanta if neither of those pieces are on the table. So that's going to be a sticking point in those talks. Elsewhere, we keep hearing Toronto is still involved in AD, and there are going to be other teams too that check around on it. I think for now, though, just confidently speaking publicly, I think Toronto and Atlanta are still the only teams that we can talk about as confirmed teams that are interested in pursuing Anthony Davis. And with Toronto, I think their side of this, their interest, I think only has to grow the longer that Jakob Poeltl is out due to injury, and the future of Toronto's front court, both right now and in the long term, like the future of this season, but also multiple years, because Jakob Poeltl just signed a 4-year deal. What his status and what the Raptors think of him moving forward will be as pertinent to anything with the Raptors' pursuit of any Anthony Davis trade. M. Garcia 621 wants to know, do I think the Lakers actually make a move? And that will bring us into our third scheduled item on the docket here today, because we have talked about the Lakers wanting and looking at 3-and-D wings to slot between Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, LeBron James, and DeAndre Ayton for a long time now, dating back to the offseason, dating back to the fall. And the Lakers are definitely open to say, like, we are looking at 3-and-D wings. The reality is there just aren't that many of them on the market right now. Like, absolutely, they would love to get their hands on one of Herb Jones or Trey Murphy the third from New Orleans. Like, that's without a doubt. But the Pelicans have an incredibly high asking price for those guys, to the point where people just don't really think those guys are actually available. So at this point in time, I don't know how aggressive the Lakers are going to actually be, because I don't really think there's anyone for the taking that at this point the Lakers believe is worth them putting 2031 draft capital, Dalton Connect, even though I don't know how sexy Dalton Connect really is as a trade sweetener right now compared to where he was a year ago when he was a piece going to Charlotte in that Mark Williams trade. He obviously has not really developed into anything further in the Lakers organization over the last several months. So I just don't really see the Lakers seeing options that are worth draft cut. That doesn't mean they're not going to do anything. They could get to $20 million in outgoing salary pretty easily by putting Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt together. And that puts you in a pretty good category of trying to go out and add wings. But is there anyone making $20 million who's available for trade that is someone that the Lakers really think is worth a first-round pick? That's the question. So I think for now, I'm more focused on Los Angeles targeting more minimum salary guys. And I see it in the chat, John Harbaugh fired. That is not our sport, but that is breaking news. So if you're here for breaking news and notes from the professional sports world, we did just get word that the Ravens, after 18 years, have parted ways with John Harbaugh. So there you go. We're a multi-sport show here right now. But back to the Lakers. MJ Fadeaway wants to know, are they open to upgrading on Ayton? And I've said that here for some time now. I don't think anyone in that Lakers building looks at DeAndre Ayton as their long-term answer at center, as their pick and roll rim lob threat that Luka Doncic is going to grow old with in Hollywood. So, there was some consternation already, this week with JJ Redick having to answer questions about DeAndre Ayton being satisfied with his touches offensively. I don't see the Lakers being like super aggressive and active right now trying to upgrade at that center position. But when they get into this summer and they have some cap space to play with, I'm definitely anticipating that Los Angeles looks at the front court and tries to see what type of big man they could potentially get. They've been linked obviously to Walker Kessler for some time. He'll be a restricted free agent finally. Jalen Duren, I think, was someone that every team around the league was hoping maybe would be gettable, but after an incredible season in Detroit, I just don't see him being someone that's going to change teams. But who's to say what happens depending on the playoff run, and now that expectations are a bit higher in Detroit. But for now, I think everything Lakers. Someone in the chat, I just saw that at the corner of my eye, said the Lakers need Chris Paul. We wrote that last week at the Steinline that the Lakers are not a Chris Paul team, and he's not someone that they have targeted by any means. To my understanding, they're looking more at players on Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves' timeline, players more in their prime, right before their prime, as opposed to people on the outs of their career. That was why Ayton was someone they wanted to take a flyer on, right? Like he's right in that age bracket, right in that timeline of Luka, of Austin. So if you're trying to look at anyone that the Lakers could potentially look at, I see Keon Ellis right here in the chat. He's definitely someone that the Lakers have had their eye on for sure. I mean, I think the entire league has their eye on Keon Ellis, but Sacramento at this juncture, I don't think is so keen on moving him. They definitely like him there, and they don't want to use him to offload any salary. I've heard that as well. Any other Lakers questions in the chat before we move on? Here's one from Sean Taylor F9N. Could the Lakers possibly go get Dillon Brooks? And that brings us to our fourth item here on the docket. Dillon Brooks would be fascinating with the Lakers because he'd bring that absolute dog toughness that they're clearly lacking on the perimeter. And look, the reality is, he'll say it, the Grizzlies will say it. That Grizzlies-Lakers series years ago was the precursor for the end of Dillon Brooks' time with the Grizzlies, and what really spearheaded his change in free agency to have him go to Houston and kind of start that whole rebuild with the Rockets and get Houston trending back in this direction that they're in now of being a contender in the Western Conference. There's definitely going to be some interest in Dillon Brooks, and Phoenix coming out and having this really shocking start to the year. I mean, shout out to Jordan Ott, the first-year head coach, having Phoenix 21-15. The Suns, I think, were expecting a better season than last, just moving on from KD and Bradley Beal, and that whole maelstrom was just an uncomfortable situation by year's end, and Mike Budenholzer certainly wore out his welcome with that franchise. They were very excited about Jordan Ott. They were excited about the return they got back from Kevin Durant. But I don't think anyone in Phoenix in their most loftiest ambitions really thought that they'd be knocking on the door of being out of the play-in tournament altogether. And Dillon Brooks has been a huge part of that. He's hitting isolation, game-winning jumpers in the fourth quarter action. And Matt Ishbia, right here, right on time. Shout out producer Alana. I was just about to say this. Matt Ishbia on Twitter came out and said, don't bother calling. The Suns aren't interested in trading Dillon Brooks. Dillon's not going anywhere. So it's just an amazing development in Phoenix all around, that this guy, who I've always been a fan of Dillon Brooks, like, the dude backs up everything that he talks. And I spent some time with him off the floor, like at practice in the World Cup in 2023 in Manila when he was playing with Team Canada. He's like a really soft-spoken, quiet, nice guy off the floor. So it's just such a fascinating dynamic that he is this big, growling bully on the court and as confident as anyone, but as like mild-mannered and soft-spoken off of it. Like what a contrast. And the fact that he has turned himself from outgoing salary piece in Houston for Kevin Durant to just one of the bigger offseason additions and like the second banana in Phoenix. It's been a true turnaround. I mean, another huge piece of Phoenix's season has been improved health and also like a major breakout season from Colin Gillespie. So things have just broken absolutely perfectly for the Suns. And it's interesting, like their owners coming out and saying they're not moving Dillon Brooks. Well, what are they going to do? That's definitely a question that when I make my calls around the league and talk to people in other front offices, they're now wondering, like, could Phoenix be buyers? They've got, a $10 million salary trip and Royce O'Neal right away. They've tried to figure out ways to move off of Nick Richards and Grayson Allen this past summer. They've talked as recently as December to move Nick Richards to Toronto. So, they're right above the tax. So there is. I was just talking to a cap person about this yesterday. There is probably just the greatest likelihood that Phoenix makes a small move to get under the tax as opposed to doing anything too aggressive after they just saw firsthand last year how hamstrung you can be by being in the second apron, let alone the first apron. And they're nowhere close to the second. I would be shocked if they waded into the second apron with any type of move this year. They haven't even seen Jalen Green really at all consistently this year. So they're doing so well at this point in time with probably the marquee name of that return for Kevin Durant not even on the floor yet. A 23-year-old top 3 pick who clearly has untapped potential still yet to be realized. So what Phoenix ends up shaping into on this trade market is definitely something that we'll probably talk about more in the coming weeks as we and the Suns themselves figure out how legitimate they actually are, because they've won 7 of their last 10 games now with some big wins, just like last night. They were right in the thick of things with Houston before that game came out and snatched from them with Kevin Durant. But, beating OKC the other day too. I mean, that back-to-back stretch of beating OKC and coming down to the wire with Houston, I think Phoenix is probably feeling a little bit emboldened right now. So we'll see just how emboldened they are moving forward. And we are going to go back to the chat. Cam JF15 says he'd love to see Dillon Brooks on the Bucks. Well, you're not getting him, unfortunately, but he would be a massive addition to Milwaukee. I would 100% agree with that. Reeves for Dillon straight up is a hilarious comment from Sean Taylor, F9N. There's no way the Lakers are trading Austin Reeves, barring it being someone of absolute massive franchise-altering consequence. And as much as I love Dillon Brooks, he is not that guy. What are the Suns' feelings on their young centers like Mark Williams and Malawach? That's from Dat Canadian 7172. I don't think that Phoenix expected either of those two guys to be like stamping themselves as the clear-cut center of the future right now. I think Phoenix has always kind of had the long view with both of them, and they've liked the returns from Mark so far. Obviously, Malawach has not been playing major minutes so consistently this year, but I think for Mark to be healthy and like relatively consistent has been something that has been a positive development that they've been happy about. Yeah. Let's get back to our rundown here before we hit the chat one more time, because once again, the league is waiting to figure out whether or not the Chicago Bulls are going to be buyers or sellers. And I think they are interesting to talk about here because they are pretty indicative of where the entire NBA trade market really stands. Because the standings are so bunched up that I don't fault a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are one spot above the Bulls in the standings at 20-17 as the 8th seed currently in the East, to want to figure out where they stand come the end of January when there's 12, 13, 14 games left to play in this month. If you go 7-3, if you go 8-4 compared to the opposite of that, then all of a sudden your calculus is going to be much, much different. And for Chicago, I think the Bulls, it's interesting. I think the more they were to lose games coming up, I actually could see them being more inclined to buy. They've got the Bulls are so interestingly positioned in that they have roughly $50 million in expiring contracts to go make any type of move with if they wanted to. If they wanted to really get involved in Anthony Davis's sweepstakes, they could. They've got Kevin Huerter, Zach Collins, and Nikola Vucevic that together could combine and really go out and pursue anyone on the market with the right amount of draft capital. And that expiring contract, poo-poo platter wouldn't exactly be something that teams would bark at. Like, if you want to talk about moving off of Patrick Williams' money, that's a whole nother conversation. But if you're putting an outgoing salary package of purely expiring money on the table, I mean, it's 21, it's 18. You get to close to $60 million with the three of those guys. So they could get in the mix with anyone. And they have one pick out the door protected with Portland this year, but otherwise the Bulls have access to all their draft capital moving forward. So they've got a lot of different options they could do. If they do sell, the name that everyone around the league is really looking at is Kobe White. He's someone that's previously been reported as a potential name to watch in Minnesota as they look at point guards. And he's not, a big tier salary guy like Trae Young, like John Morant, like we were talking about. Getting to his salary number is far more manageable at, below the mid-level, where Kobe White just makes 12.8 this year. It's complicated in that any team trading for him is going to have to be prepared to pay for whatever new contract he wants next year, or else they're just looking at him as a one-year rental. But the Bulls with Vucevic, who could, in theory, help a team with his stretch ability offensively, although the defensive questions will be there. Kevin Huerter shooting, Kobe White. Those are all guys that I think will be interesting. Even Trae Jones. Trae Jones is someone that, like Minnesota, for an example, someone who's looking for just a sturdy backup point guard. Trae Jones at $8 million, below, basically half the mid-level exception, I think will have plenty of interest. And Ayo Dosunmu, when I talk to people around the league, people ask me, like, what do you think the Bulls are going to do with Ayo? So there's a lot of names that I think would have decent markets if Chicago does decide to sell. And this is currently a marketplace that has a dearth of sellers. So there could be an opportunity for Chicago to gain a lot if they do end up entering the trade market as bona fide sellers. They're a team that Jonathan Kuminga has been linked to in the past as well. So to round out today's show, if Chicago does decide to be buyers, he's someone I'd put right on the radar with Anthony Davis, with Domantas Sabonis as bigger names that you could expect and prepare for Chicago to potentially pursue if they do switch to being buyers. For Kuminga right now, I still have some more calls to make for sure, but he will become trade eligible in 9 days. And I think the market is relatively cool. The one team we know definitively that still has interest is Sacramento. They have been interested in him since the summer. The difficulties there have been that whatever Malik Monk centered package that the Kings would like to send out, and Sacramento was willing to put a first round pick on the table to make that sign and trade happen this past summer. But the Warriors have just not had interest in Malik Monk. And I think it's as much because of his contract and the multiple years remaining and the player option than Monk as a player. So could a Jonathan Kuminga trade ultimately come down to whether or not Golden State could find a 3-team deal where they move Malik Monk and stuff elsewhere? certainly plausible. But at this point in time, with so many question marks on, are the Bulls going to sell? What will the Hawks do with Trae Young? Who's going to actually pony up and pay for Anthony Davis? The Warriors wanting to move Jonathan Kuminga and Jonathan Kuminga wanting a new home. Those are absolutes. That's one of the few things that we know definitively to be true about this trade market. And so 9 days away, he finally becomes trade eligible. We're going to see over the next week or so, our next Tuesday show is a week from today, January 13th. I think by the time you see me next on this app on your screen, there's going to be much more information to share because actions are sparked by deadlines in this business, in this NBA marketplace, and having a very close deadline, or at least a sounding horn for Kuminga to be moved, is going to really ramp up incoming trade calls for Jonathan Kuminga. And the Warriors definitely want to move him. They were just here in Brooklyn last Monday. They played every single player on the roster healthy aside from Jonathan Kuminga. He's out of the rotation. There's not much he can do to get back into it. And that's where the Warriors are going to be absolutely predicated on moving forward, finding a way to flip his salary to something that can help Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler win an NBA championship. And right now, what is considered a far more open Western Conference than it was a month ago, now that Oklahoma City has gone just 500 in their last 12 games after a remarkable 24-1 start. There are so many more questions in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them, but we appreciate all of the engagement, all the questions, and please come back next week. We will get to as many questions as we can, I promise you. And I can almost assure you, as I just said, we'll probably be starting off that show with the latest and greatest on everything out of Golden State and a potential Jonathan Kuminga trade sweepstakes that could be taking shape. For now, thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate all the questions in the chat, like I said, and we'd appreciate it if you came back again next week. Have a good rest of your time following the NBA. We'll see you.